morning, everybody, and welcome to class number 10 of our 2025 virtual HOA and Condo Academy. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025, and our topic for today is navigating assessments and large capital improvement projects. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. I'm going to give a few seconds for attendees to either enter the Zoom and get settled here or to join us on Facebook Live. Welcome to class number 10 of our 2025 virtual HOA and Condo Academy. We teach these classes in partnership with the cities of Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Goodyear, Mesa, Peoria, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Surprise, and the city of Tempe. My name is Beth Mulcahy, and I am the founder and senior partner for the Mulcahy Law Firm in Phoenix, Arizona. My firm currently represents over 1,000 planned communities and condominium associations throughout the state of Arizona. I also currently serve on my HOA board and have now for over 14 years. In this class, we will explore whether associations should increase their assessments, the regular assessments, and by how much, and what legal authority they have to increase those assessments. We're also going to talk a little bit about special assessments and managing large capital improvement projects. And how you can best manage capital improvement projects in your association. And honestly, this is a great time of the year to be teaching this class because many of you are working on your budgets right now for 2026. And you're probably considering whether or not you want to do an increase in your assessments or maybe even have a special large capital improvement project in your association this year and how you might be able to fund that. Okay, moving right along, we're going to address questions, of course, like we always do at the end of the class. So if you have questions, we're probably going to be concluding the main presentation a little bit before noon today, and we'll move right into the questions at that time. Due to the large volume of attendees, what we typically will do is ask that it's only one question per attendee. And please, if you're giving us a question, please make it as short as possible and to the point. And not association specific using like your association's name, etc. If you're joining us on Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please type your question in the comments section. Okay, let's move right along. We're going to be doing a poll to start out this class today, just so we can determine how many of you are here today. So before we start the seminar, I'd like to get a feel for who our audience is so I can best tailor the class here today. First question is, in which city do you reside? So if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please put the city where your HOA or condo is located in Arizona. The second poll question is, let us know your current role with the association. We're interested in that so that we can tailor the class to best suit the needs of who's attending here today. While we're waiting for those poll results, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the Arizona legislature. And we've been talking about, the 2025 Arizona legislature since the beginning of January. Now we're 10 months into our year, and we had 4 bills that directly impact associations that were passed this year. And all those bills went into effect on September 26th. It was a pretty active year this year in the legislature. There were a lot of bills introduced, but fortunately, we only ended up with 4 new ones to further regulate associations. So here is just a very quick summary of the new laws impacting HOAs and condos. And again, these laws have already gone into effect on September 26, 2025. So the first bill is Senate Bill 1039. This bill applies to both planned communities and to condominiums. And the impact of this bill is, it talks about recording of board meetings. And so I would say most of our clients now are conducting Zoom meetings for their board meetings. And so there's a feature on Zoom where you can, click record the meetings. And so I think this is kind of a sign of the times law in that, there are pretty frequently now recordings of board meetings. And prior to COVID, not a lot of our clients had recording systems and they weren't using Zoom, and it was kind of cumbersome to record a board meeting. But now it's pretty commonplace because virtual meetings are kind of taking over. So basically what this law says is that boards must keep recordings of an open meeting for 6 months. And if an owner wants to see a copy of that recording of the meeting, that they are entitled to receive an unedited copy of the recording of that meeting. This bill does not say that planned communities and condominiums must record their board meetings. It just says if you do, you have to keep it for 6 months. and that if an owner wants to see an unedited version of the meeting, you have to provide it to them. Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 1378. This also applies to both planned communities and to condominiums, and this talks about flags that are used, political flags in a community. So another sign of the times bill, frankly, after the last two presidential elections. Basically what this bill says is that political sign definition is included political flags that are being flown. And so kind of the impact of this is if you live in a planned community or a condominium and you have an owner that wants to fly a political flag, it's going to be subject to the same rules as political signs would be in your community. And there's a state law already on the political signs. So it can only be a certain size and you can only fly it a certain number of days before the primary, and it has to be down a certain number of days after the election. And again, that bill went into effect on September 26th. And with the general election, we've got another election and some propositions that are going to be voted on here in the next 4 weeks. That may be something that you'll want to keep an eye on. Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 1494. This bill only applies to planned communities, so condominiums, this does not apply to you. And this just kind of changes the threshold for when we're able to foreclose. It makes it a little bit more difficult for us to foreclose if you're a planned community. So basically what the law change is that we have to hit a certain benchmark before we can foreclose on an owner for not paying their assessments. And that benchmark was changed from 12 months to 18 months, or it used to be $1,200 in delinquency. Now it's $10,000 in the delinquency. So the practical implication of this bill is it's more difficult for planned communities to foreclose. It's not significantly more difficult because, I mean, it's you only have to wait an extra 6 months, basically, which is probably where, most of us are going to, this bill is going to impact us the most. So if you're a planned community and you're looking at this new bill and how it might affect your association, if you have an owner who hasn't paid assessments for 18 months, you can foreclose. It's an or, so it's either 18 months or they owe 10 grand. I mean, let's be real here. Not a lot of planned communities have assessments that are that high a dollar amount. So to get to 10 grand, it's going to be like really difficult. And so it's either or. So whatever occurs first. So if they haven't paid their assessments for 18 months, we can now foreclose on that assessment lien, or $10,000 delinquency. Okay, the last new law that impacts HOAs and condos is going to be House Bill 2322. And this particular law, it really it impacts condominiums only, and it really kind of just gives us some additional information about commercial condominiums, so like office condos, and helps with some definitions pertaining to that. Not a lot of associations actually are going to be, dealing with that particular law because we don't have that many commercial condominium associations in Arizona. Okay, let's go back to our poll results. So we have our poll results in, and in which city do you reside? We have 1% today from Avondale. We have 8% from Chandler, 3% from Glendale, 4% from Goodyear, 24% from Mesa. Wow, that's really good representation. 7% from Peoria, 19% from Phoenix, 19% from Scottsdale. So awesome. Two more great cities with great representation today. 8% from Surprise, 8% from Tempe. And so that's amazing. So we have every city that is putting on these classes in conjunction with their firm is represented here today. So that's amazing. The next question is, what is your current role? So we have 60% of you are on the board. We have 11% that are managers, 25% that are interested homeowners, and then other 4. And really interesting, we have over 155 people here on Zoom and Facebook Live today. So that's a really great turnout. So happy to see so many people here today, caring about your communities and wanting to learn more about assessments and large capital improvement projects. Okay, just briefly going to go back and talk about just a couple other things that I think on the new legislation that are important for us to know about this year's legislature. The small claims court limit was raised to $5,000. There are some new procedures for county tax deed land sales. And HOAs may buy their common area property back. They lose it. It's kind of a weird one. There's some new construction hours, there's a bill, and also some new accessory dwelling laws. But on both of those bills that talk about municipality regulations, associations can be more stringent or pass rules or, have something in their documents that talks about construction hours and when you can start construction and when you can end them. And also accessory dwelling units. If you have something in your documents that's more strict than what the new law says, we can, and most of our clients do have that. Our documents still control here. And then the last thing is, if you're getting ready to file your annual report this year for your association with the Arizona Corporation Commission, don't forget, every year you have to file your annual report to keep your corporate status. Why do we do this? So that we don't have personal liability for all the members in the association. So really important that everybody file their annual report every year. Unfortunately, they're not all due January 1st. I wish we had just a set date that they were due by. You have to check what your due date is for your association. It usually depends on when you were incorporated. So it's throughout the year they're due. Anyways, when you're filing your annual report now, in Arizona, you have to have 2 forms of ID are required for the filing. So very interesting corporations, will have to submit a custom annual report with these 2 forms of ID. So it's just going to make it a little more difficult for the management company or the board members to file their annual reports. If you need help with it, our firm is here ready, willing, and able to help you through that process. Okay, let's pop right into our main presentation today. We're going to be talking about assessments and how to best manage large capital improvement projects. So just as a starting point, this, like I said a little earlier in this presentation, this topic is a great topic for this time of the year because many of you, myself included, on the 2 boards that I'm currently on, we're getting together our what our budget is going to be for 2026. And so we're running the numbers, we're determining how much of an increase we have to have in our assessments to pay our just normal bills. And then in one particular association, or actually 2, we're talking about large capital improvements on the master and the sub-association board that I'm a board member for. And so this is a really relevant topic for a lot of associations because usually September, October, November, and to some extent December are planning times for your 2026 boards and associations. And so we have to anticipate how much money we're going to need to pay all of our bills in 2026. And we have to anticipate how much money we're going to need in case we want to do any large projects to maybe redo a pool or, repave your association's roads or something like that. So in this session, this is a really hot topic for this time of the year. So hopefully the information that we provide to you today can really help you as you're putting your budget together for 2026. Don't forget, we have 2 great cheat sheets that kind of go hand in hand with this presentation today. One is on budget preparation, and you can find those cheat sheets on our website at mulcahylawfirm.com. So if your association is struggling right now on putting your budget together, would be a great idea to go get that cheat sheet off of our website and take a look at it because it gives you just from A to Z how to start a budget and finish it. If anybody here wants a sample budget in an Excel spreadsheet, I also can provide that to you as well. Just so you can kind of see how we set it up in the sample budget for an association. Another really great cheat sheet that might be helpful for you today would be the one that we have on reserve studies, especially as we look at large capital improvement projects. And so I encourage you to take a look at both of those cheat sheets if you are so inclined. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's the difference between a regular assessment and a special assessment. And let's just make this as easy as possible to understand. So a regular assessment is the reoccurring dues or fee that's set in the annual budget, and it's paid per owner to fund routine operations in your association. Like every association has on their financials just regular bills that they have to pay, like landscaping, insurance, management company fees, legal fees, utilities for common areas. Maybe they make a reserve contribution every year off of their, general income that they have coming into the association. So typically a regular assessment is going to be billed monthly, quarterly, annually pursuant to the governing documents, most of our clients are doing monthly billing of the regular assessment. So again, just to kind of close the loop, regular assessments are reoccurring. It's usually they're set up in the CC&Rs, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And you set it in the budget each year. And usually the budgets have like a formula sheet where it takes like maybe you need $1 million to run your association and you have 100 owners, and the Excel spreadsheet formula will divide what you need by 100 owners, and then they'll divide it by 12 for 12 monthly installments. Okay, special assessments. This is a little different. This is a one-time charge or a limited term charge in addition to the regular assessment to fund a specific shortfall or a project. So for example, if you're a condominium and you need to have your roofs replaced, or you're a condominium and you need to have a new chiller put in, or you're a planned community and you want to redo your clubhouse, these would be a special assessment. Is typically how sometimes this is funded in an association. It also could be for an emergency. For your association, like an emergency repair. Or unfortunately, sometimes we've seen a special assessment to pay for a lawsuit judgment. Not very often, but occasionally we will see that if there's not enough funds in the association to pay for a judgment that may be entered against them and there's not enough insurance. Typically, the special assessment is tied to a defined purpose, and that's usually defined in the CC&R. So what does that mean? The special assessment, there'll be a section in your CC&Rs that will say, an association's board can levy a special assessment for the purpose of maybe funding the reserve, or for the purpose of a long-term capital improvement project that needs to be done in your community, or an emergency funds that are needed. So typically, it is defined in the CC&Rs, and it will usually also indicate how that can be done. Sometimes an association CC&Rs, the board is allowed to levy a special assessment without a vote of membership. But more often than not, you need a percentage vote of the homeowners to levy a special assessment in your community. We're going to go more in depth on that in a minute, but oftentimes there may be a payment schedule that's offered to the owners if it's a large dollar amount, whereby, like if it's $20,000 or something really large, maybe they'll let people pay it off over 20 months, $1,000 a month or whatever. And that's something that the board just sets up initially in the planning process for the special assessment. Okay, what are the differences between a regular assessment and a special assessment? Really, the purpose is different. So regular assessments are going to be for ongoing operations, and reserves typically are for something specific or a shortfall that they may not have enough money for something and they need to have a special assessment for it. So typically the purposes are different for both. The duration is different too. Like it's a regular assessment is ongoing. A special assessment is usually like a one-time thing, or maybe it's just over a year or 2 years that you pay a special assessment for something. Also, some key differences are that to increase the assessment, the regular assessment may have a different requirement in your documents or by state law versus the special assessment. So I wish we could just say that everything, you can increase the special assessment, a certain way, and it's the same way for the increasing the regular assessment, but that's usually not how it works. Usually you really have to be dialed into what your documents say and what state law says to know, how you can increase the assessment or the special assessment. Okay, where does the power to levy these amounts come from? So typically it's going to be from your governing documents, and it's 99.99% of the time going to be in your CC&Rs. And that's where there's usually a special section in your CC&Rs that talks about regular assessments, how they can be increased with or without a vote of the membership. And everybody's documents are a little bit different. So I wish I could just give you a bright line rule and say this is the rule, but every document is going to be a little different. Also, and the same thing for special assessments. Every document is going to lay out how to do a special assessment. Occasionally, we'll see associations documents that don't even envision having a special assessment, which is unfortunate. That's something that every association really needs to have in case they get in a pinch and don't have enough money to pay for an emergency or a large capital improvement project out of their, general assessment fund. There's also some legal authority in Arizona law that talks about, some like limits that are placed on boards. If your documents don't have, a limit in terms of how much you can increase your assessment rate, et cetera. And we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. Kind of a really important thing to think about if you are planning your budget and you're thinking about an increase in assessments, regular assessments, or a special assessment this year and coming year in 2026, you really need to think about, are we a condominium or are we a planned community? Because there are some nuances in the law that make the requirements a little bit different for condominiums versus planned communities if you're thinking about increasing your regular assessment or if you're thinking about levying a special assessment. So remember, always know, especially if you're a townhome, because it's kind of confusing in Arizona, townhomes are not legally recognized, which is just a weird nuance, but it is what it is. So if you're a townhome, you're either a condo or a planned community. Townhomes are not legally, even though your documents may call you a townhome, they're not legally recognized in Arizona. And so, if you're at this juncture, sometimes it's really easy. Like you look at your documents and it just says ABC Condominium Association. So most likely you are a condominium, right? But or maybe you say ABC Homeowners Association is usually going to be a planned community. But if you want to know the difference from a legal perspective as to whether you're a planned community or a condominium, the legal difference is really who owns the common areas is the first thing that I look at. If the association owns the common areas, you're traditionally going to be a planned community. If the owners in the condominium, let's say there's 100 owners in the condominium and they own a percentage interest in the common areas through their deed, then you're typically going to be a condominium. Okay, let's move right along and let's talk a little bit about how to increase your regular assessment. So if you're looking at your budget right now and you've got your total dollar amount that you think you need in income and you're looking at ways to fund it, you may be looking at, okay, how do we raise our regular assessment to meet our expenses for 2026? So if you're a planned community, the analysis is going to be a little different for planned communities versus condominiums. So if you're looking to raise your regular assessment and you're a planned community, first, you're going to be drafting your budget, right, for the next fiscal year, and you're going to have your operating budget, right? And then you're going to have how much money you need in your reserves. Hopefully, you have a reserve account. So the first step is, okay, come up with the numbers that you need for 2026. So what are our expenses, or what do we anticipate our expenses will be? And, look at our cheat sheet on, budget preparation. It'll be helpful for you as you navigate that process. The next thing you want to do is check the documents, right? Do the documents give you any sort of direction as to how much the board can increase the assessment rate in a planned community? So we really see all different kinds of language in CC&Rs. Kind of a common thing that we would see is that the board can increase it up to 10% without a vote of the membership. And then anything over 10%, the board would need to get like 51% or 67% of the membership to approve it. And so we want to look at your documents. That's a common one. Also, sometimes we'll see in older documents that were written like in the 90s, 80s, 70s, we'll see they tie in the assessment increase with whatever the consumer price index is. And that's going to be, a small percentage, smaller than 10% for sure. And there's consumer price index calculators that you can find online to help you navigate that, how much you can increase it. So the key thing is if you're a planned community, you're going to want to check your documents to see what your documents say about how much, you can increase the assessment rate per owner without getting a vote of the membership. So the board's going to have to look at that. And honestly, being on my board myself for many years, we really do think about that as we're creating the budget, because the reality of the situation is that when we're creating the budget, we know we're going to have to face our owners, like our annual meetings in December. And if we have a large increase, we're going to hear about it. And so we're trying to balance, not having the assessment rate be so high that people who are looking to buy in our association won't want to live here and will maybe go to the association down the street where the assessment rate is a little bit lower. Also, we're balancing, are people going to be really upset about this? right? Like, is it an 8% increase? Is that too much? Are people going to say, hey, that's not keeping up with inflation? That's much higher. With the actual needs we have, like the reality is our insurance bills are going up, our, electric bills, our utilities, our trash services, all these expenses are going up. Our management company fees are going up each year, and we can't not raise it. Otherwise, we start, going into a deficit situation, which we don't want. So just as a reminder, as a plan community, check your documents to see what it says about increasing the regular assessment. That's the first stop. If your documents are silent or on increasing the assessment, or maybe it doesn't even have any cap on it, maybe it says something like the board can increase it for whatever the needs are, well, then there's a state law that kicks in and says that if the proposed regular assessment is greater than 20% above the prior fiscal year's regular assessment, they're going to need to get 51% membership approval in order to do that. So the only time we would look at that state law, again, is if your documents are silent on how to increase the regular assessment, or maybe it gives the board the authority to, or all kinds of authority, no cap on how much they can increase it. Then the state law is going to kick in and put a ceiling on that and be like, wait a minute here. You can only increase it above 20% above the prior fiscal year's assessment with a membership approval by 51% of your members. And so that's kind of an important little distinction for everybody to think about as you're planning your budget. Remember that if you are doing an increase in a plan community, a very practical suggestion here would be talk about the budget in an open board meeting. You may not have a lot of people coming, but at least there'll be minutes showing that you were talking about this and why there's a need for the increase. Also, when you notify the owners, maybe you're sending out a communication or a newsletter, or you're putting something up on your website, explain it really well. This is why we need an increase in our assessment rate. And, show them the budget, give them an opportunity to look at the budget. And I think if you have good communication, most people understand that each year things get more expensive, right? And so there shouldn't be a lot of pushback. What I found people really don't like is when you don't raise it for 8 years, don't do any increase in your assessment rate, and then year 9, you're trying to raise it by like 40% or something. So that's a very big differential for people in their own personal budget. So it's much better, in my opinion, and much more fiscally sound to be doing, a small increase every year based upon what the increases are that your vendors are giving you, or the different services that you're providing to your association members. Okay, let's talk a little bit about condominiums. It's a little different analysis for same but different. So in a condominium, you're going to do the same process. You're going to be doing your budget, just like we talked about for our planned community. But there's a little bit different process in condominiums. Some condominiums have a requirement that they have to have the owners approve the budget. And so you got to look at your documents to see if your documents require that. And if that is the case, then you have to provide the budget to the owners within a certain timeline. And then there's a meeting. It's just a regular board meeting. And if the owners that come to the regular board meeting, if more people are opposed to passing the budget than are in favor of it, then we may have to go back to the drawing board and create a new budget and notify the owners of the new budget and do the same thing again. Have another meeting, a regular meeting of the board. And if people come to the meeting and they say, we don't like this increase, and there's more people that don't like the increase than, people that are in favor of the increase, then you may have to go back to the drawing board a couple times. Now, the practical reality of this is that hardly any people come to the board meetings, okay? So even when you're talking about the budget, unless there's like some really big hot topic that, is pertaining to the budget, most people are not coming to board meetings if you're in a condo. So the practical reality is the fact that, there likely will not be people that are opposed to the budget, or there are likely people that don't even know they have the right to be opposed to the budget. So it just doesn't come up in practical, reality of being in a condominium board. So let's go back to condominiums and remember that when you're creating your budget, you want to look at your CC&Rs to see how regular assessments can be increased. Typically, it's very specific as to how, the increase can be handled by the board. usually like the consumer price index. It could be a percentage like 10 or 15 or 20%. The interesting thing about condominiums versus planned communities is we don't have that law that's that 20% law that we talked about a minute ago with planned communities. So there is really no cap on how much the board can increase the assessment in a condominium other than what's listed in your documents. So if your documents don't have a cap, there's no state law to put a ceiling on how high your board can increase the assessment. And again, same process for condominiums. Just have good communication with your owners. Be very upfront with them about why we need to increase the assessment. And smaller increases each year are better than having a big increase, at the end of 8 years with no increases. Okay, some best practices just to go over for you as you're navigating, levying your regular assessments and increasing your assessments each year as part of your budgeting process. I think it's really helpful to use an assessment calculator showing, okay, this is how much the dues were before, and this is how much they are now, and here's what percentage it increased, and then where the money is going to go. Like, why do we need to have the increase? Just good communication with your owners, I think, will kind of quiet people down. If you don't communicate with your owners and tell them this information, and they get the new coupon book, at the beginning of January 2026 or at the end of December 2025, and they see that their assessment rate jumped from, 125 to 260, you're going to pay for it. People are going to, be upset and come to a board meeting and be screaming and yelling. So if you are going to have an increase that is going to be, any increase really, you should be doing this. But especially if you're having a big increase, you may even want to consider having like a town hall meeting to discuss this so that people are aware of the need and why we're doing this, so that there's not as much pushback when they actually have to start writing their regular assessment checks on a monthly basis or quarterly basis to your association. Okay, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about special assessments and how to levy one. Like, what's the process for a special assessment? The first thing on a special assessment is, we're going to have to really think about what's the need. Like, why do we need a special assessment? So is it an emergency repair? Is it a capital improvement project? Like, we're going to redo the clubhouse, redo the pool, redo the children's park area in your association, the roofs if you're in a condominium. These are all pretty common needs that a community or a condominium association would have. Sometimes we're also trying to fund the reserves. So let's say that the reserve account, just refresher, is kind of like a savings account for long-term capital improvement projects in your association. And ideally, you should be putting money in your savings account every month, to pursuant to a reserve study that's been done by a professional company telling us, okay, these are all the assets you have for your community. And, it tells us what the useful life is for them. And maybe that pool's useful life is up in 5 years. So we should be saving every year between now and 5 years so that at the end of the 5 years, we have the money in our reserve to pay for the pool, resurfacing or repaving or plastering or whatever the issue is. So first thing we want to do is identify what's the need here. What's the need that needs the big money? Okay, then we're going to need to define the scope and the cost. So we're going to need to obtain bids, try to get bids from 3 different vendors. They should be licensed, bonded, insured vendors. Please, please, please do not use unlicensed vendors when you're doing a large capital improvement project. You may have to bring in experts like an engineer to help you with something. You also may want to set a contingency. I know my association right now is doing a special assessment to do some major capital improvements to our common areas. And we factored in like a 20% contingency for things that can go wrong or problems. And honestly, I'm really glad we did, because we just had a little problem that came up about a month ago that it's going to be a $50,000 problem. And as we started to do the work, and we're really happy, we have that contingency built into the special assessment. So all things to think about as you're defining scope and cost of whatever the special assessments can be used for. Next thing you're going to want to do if you're thinking about levying a special assessment is, where do you get the legal authority to do this? So you're going to want to check your CC&Rs. and look to see what purpose we can levy a special assessment for. Can the board do it? Likely no alone, but usually there's a process, like the board has to make a motion to approve this at a meeting and then send it to the membership for a vote. So it will be discussed by the board. Hey, we have a need to redo the pool. And, we've gotten the bids and we've had, expert come in and provide us with, advice regarding, what type of pool changes we're going to be making. And now we have the 3 bids from licensed and bonded contractors. And, but we need to fund it now. So, the board is hereby proposing to move forward with a vote to levy a special assessment. Okay. And what you're going to want to do is look at the documents, like what membership vote is required to levy a special assessment. Because like I said, 99.99% of the time, we need members to vote to approve the special assessment. And usually it's going to be like 51% or maybe 67% of those who attend a meeting for this purpose, and the quorum for that meeting may need to be 60%. This is where you definitely want to think about getting your legal counsel involved if it's kind of confusing in the CC&Rs or the declaration as to, okay, what's the purpose? Does this meet the purpose that's defined in the CC&Rs? And then what percentage do we need? You may just want to talk it through with your attorney and make sure that you're reading it correctly so that, you're stating properly what the percentage is that we need. And then typically you're going to just go through like the whole process of getting the vote. So maybe you do it in conjunction with an annual meeting. Maybe you have a special meeting in the membership just for this purpose, but you're going to have to notice the meeting pursuant to what your documents state and state law. You're going to have to send out ballots. Some of you are still doing paper ballots. Probably the majority of you are still doing paper ballots, but many of you are now converting to using like online voting systems, which is amazing. It's kind of the future of our industry. So you're going to come up with the balloting procedures, and then you're going to actually have the meeting. We're going to have a quorum of the members there, and then you're going to have to look at what your documents say to have the quorum. And then you're going to count the ballots at the meeting and see if you got the percentage that you need. And so it's really a good idea. This is a little more complicated, than a normal situation with, where the board just can approve something. When you have to get a membership approval, this is really where you need to dial in and get your attorney involved to help you through this entire process so you do it right. Because if you have anybody who's opposed to it, they're going to be looking for problems, and they potentially could sue if they don't want to pay it, and could really slow down the entire process with the lawsuit. So this would be where I would recommend you bring in your legal counsel to help you navigate this process as you're figuring out how to, move forward with the special assessment, from identifying the need to, defining the scope and how much it's going to cost, to getting the membership approval at a special meeting of the membership, and then how you're going to collect the special assessment as you move forward. Okay. Some important nuances that we want to think about for, collection of either special assessments or increasing the regular assessment. Be reasonable on the special assessment would be one thing that I'm going to say. There are times where a board, you're collecting a special assessment and maybe somebody comes to you and says, hey, I don't have $5,000. I'm on a fixed income and I can't come up with the $5,000. It's in those situations where I think boards need to be reasonable and try to work with the owner. Say, well, what could you do? Can you pay $500 a month, until it's paid off? Try to work out a payment plan. Usually, I can't think of really any times where we've had an owner come to us in 29 years and they want to pay the special assessment, but they can't do a lump sum payment. And so we work out like a little payment plan with them. I can't think of one time where somebody breached it. And so just be reasonable, recognize that these are your neighbors, and have good communication that if you can't afford to pay it all at once, we can do a payment plan with you. And it works. I've seen success stories on that with many associations that handle that. So really that's kind of, our main points on regular assessments versus special assessments. What's the procedure to levy them? When do you need a homeowner vote? A lot of this is going to be document specific. And you definitely want to be reaching out to your attorney to help you through this process because you want to make sure you do it right so that you don't get sued by an owner. Okay, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about large capital improvement projects. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the special assessment discussion. Typically when a board comes to me with a large capital improvement project, and like I said earlier, I'm also involved in 2 large capital improvement projects for the boards I'm on right now, there's kind of 2 ways to handle it. So there's one way would be you just do like one project at a time, and maybe you do it like one big project every 2 years, or one project a year, depending on how large your association is, or one project every 5 years. One thing I can say, though, is having been in the Arizona industry since 1995, what I found most associations do is, there was a large development push in Arizona between like 1980 and about 1999. And a lot of these associations now are age-old communities. They're 25, 35 years old. And a lot of them have done a lot of Band-Aids. And, I call it caulking and walking, not really fixing the problem, but just kind of temporarily fixing it. And now they're faced with like really serious issues for an aging community that's 25 years plus old. And they have a lot of things that need to be fixed. So there's kind of 2 different ways to kind of navigate large capital improvement projects. The best way, in my opinion, would be to have a reserve study done by a licensed and qualified reserve specialist, and do that. You should already have that for your association. If you don't, I would really recommend that you look at our cheat sheet on this and consider getting a reserve study done, because that's kind of like your roadmap as to how much life each of these elements of your association has left before you have to totally replace it. So, for example, the reserve specialist company will come out to your association and they will do like an inventory of all the things that the association's board is responsible for maintaining. And they will look at the amenities and they'll say, okay, well, the pool only has 6 years left. And maybe the roads have 11 years left. And maybe the clubhouse is going to need a new roof in 10 years. And they put it into a formula that their company has. And then they give you a 30-year plan for your association on how you can save through your reserve account, so that when the useful life of each element is up, you have the money in your bank account, in your reserve account, to pay for it. So that's like a really good long-term planning tool. The problem in Arizona is there's no requirement under the law to have a reserve study or to have a reserve account. And so a lot of associations don't use that really great planning tool of having a reserve study to help them navigate their time on the board. So I'm glad you're here in this class today so that we can talk about how important it is to have a reserve study done and to have a reserve account for your association for many reasons. It's kind of like a long-term planning tool. It also kind of alleviates the need to have a special assessment because you're saving as you go each year. And so that's just kind of a good starting point on the large capital improvement projects. Some associations are kind of doing it the right way, where they have the money in their reserve account and they are just ticking off projects each year based upon the useful life when the amenities useful life is up. Other associations are in what I would call more of a crisis mode. Unfortunately, my association that I'm on the board, both of them are in crisis mode right now. So I'm very familiar with how that rolls. And if you're in one of those crisis mode ones, it's like you don't know which amenity you should focus on first because there's so many problems, right? And so that's a very scary and frustrating place to be. But some suggestions if you're in that place would be you really should think about bringing in like a master plan specialist if your association has the funds to do it. And there's companies all around the country that they come in, they'll do a full evaluation of your property, and they will come up with like a 10-year or 15-year plan for you on what amenities you should focus on first. And this is probably going to be for the larger master plan communities, and how we can develop this over a 10 or 15-year period and have everything, come together like a puzzle. So everything looks similar, and so that we keep the character of the association, etc. And so really there's kind of two thoughts on how to do capital improvement projects. It really depends on what kind of an association you are and how you've handled maintenance and long-term capital improvements in the past. And our firm has been successful in helping associations, all different kinds of associations, ones that have the reserve and closely follow it, ones that, maybe don't have a reserve funded or haven't really had a set plan, and now they're at the aging community crisis stage and they need help. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk a little bit about, funding of a large capital improvement project. There are a number of ways to fund it. You can fund it out of your reserve, which is the ideal way because you're not going to have a special assessment. But if you have the money in your reserve already, pursuant to a reserve study, and you've been putting money aside for a long period of time, that's great. Good for you. Most associations they don't have enough money to pay for these long-term capital improvements or large capital improvements. And so they're doing a special assessment. They may have to get a loan from a bank to do that and pay that loan back over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Sometimes they do a hybrid where maybe they take a little bit from their reserve account that they've been saving, and then they do a special assessment, or they do a loan, or maybe they, hybrid it three ways, have a loan and layer it like a loan for a certain amount of money. Some of the money comes out of the reserve, some of the money is a special assessment. It really just depends. And our firm can help you if you're in this situation where you're like, hey, we don't know what's the best way to fund this. We don't want to deplete all of our reserve account, our savings account. But, we're not sure if a bank will give us a loan. We can talk through all of this with you, and, we'll want to check your documents to see if you can even get a loan. You have to be, authorized in your documents that allows the board to take a loan for something of this nature. Most documents do allow that. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of what are some examples of a large capital improvement project in Arizona. So re-roofing, right, is a very common problem in Arizona. For condominiums, asphalt and concrete, maybe you will maintain your roads if you're a planned community, or maybe you have parking lots if you're a condominium. Plumbing and infrastructure, this is huge. Because in the 80s, a lot of this plastic, I can't even remember what it's called, it's PVC piping, was used. A lot of that piping has broken and is, causing major damage, especially in condominiums. And so converting that from, the plastic piping to, copper piping, which is, generally everybody agrees that the copper is going to be the best. So copper galvanized repiping, mainline sewer relining. Sometimes sewers over time start to fail and they start to settle in the ground and then causes sewer backups, which get very expensive. Also fire life safety systems. These are very common type large capital projects in a community. Elevators. If you're in a high-rise or mid-rise condominium and you have elevators are so expensive. And that is something that you definitely have to plan for. Usually elevators last somewhere between 25 and 35 years is kind of the, what we've learned in our industry. Pools and amenities. So clubhouses, pools, jacuzzis, all of these, pool decks, shade structures, clubhouse refreshes, all of these are examples of large capital projects, which would be common in Arizona. Water management, especially because there's so many problems in Arizona with the not having enough water, right? Because we're in the desert, and a lot of the new requirements that and incentives that are being given to HOAs and condominiums to change to greener options, which are getting away from turf and getting more into desert landscaping. And that requires, different irrigation systems. And so changing from a turf to a desert landscaping situation on your common areas, that could involve irrigation changes and also landscaping changes. Also some things that are insurance driven. Some of you may be hearing feedback from your insurance companies that, hey, we're not going to renew your policy unless you do this, 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 and this. I'd never seen that before. Maybe like 3 years ago, we never saw the insurance companies doing that. But now insurance companies are sending an inspector out to associations, typically condominiums. And they're saying, unless you do this, fireproofing, unless you change the stairwells, the spindles of the stairwells are closed or whatever, we're not going to renew your policy. So sometimes that results in us having to have a large capital project in your association. So those are just some good examples of, okay, here are the different types of large capital projects that we typically will see in Arizona. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, how to move forward. So what is our fiduciary responsibility as board members, right? And as homeowners, holding your boards accountable to make sure that they're keeping up the common areas and maintaining the common areas. And then when something is exceeded its useful life, making sure that the board takes action to fix it instead of like chaining the tennis court shut because the tennis court has major cracks and it's dangerous to play on it. Sometimes we'll see associations just chain it shut and say, oh, this amenity is not going to be used anymore. When really that's something that an owner could sue the association's board for, because there's an expectation that I bought my unit or I bought my lot and there was a tennis court here and this should be maintained. This should be, resurfaced every 6 years or whatever. And chaining it shut is not acceptable. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the board's fiduciary responsibility. Remember, in Arizona, we have a fiduciary duty to a duty of care, which means to act in the best interests of the association, make decisions that, are going to benefit the association. We have a duty of confidentiality, and then we have a duty to avoid conflicts of interest. Kind of the one that applies here is, remember that we have a fiduciary duty to always act in the best interest of the association when we're making our decisions as a board member. And as part of that, that would be keeping the amenities, in good condition, maintaining them, and then replacing them when they get to a point that their useful life is over. So how do we plan a large capital improvement? First, I would definitely talk with your attorney, your management company, if you have one, your reserve specialist, if you brought in a reserve company to help you with a reserve study, to kind of outline, okay, what is the need here, and how are we going to fund it? Do we need a vote of the membership in order to pay for it? Do we need to get a loan? Do our documents allow a loan? There's a lot of different pivots that are needed here once we say, okay, this year we are going to redo the clubhouse. Sometimes there's a weird provision in your documents that'll say, anytime the board is going to expend over a certain amount of money, like it could be $10,000 or $100,000, you require a vote of the membership. So even if you have the money in your account, you still may need to get a vote of the membership to move forward with spending $100,000 or more or whatever. So I can't stress enough the importance, as if you're at this juncture where you're levying a special assessment or you're thinking about a large capital improvement project, having what I call a preventative legal meeting with your lawyer to talk about, okay, this is what we're thinking about doing. Help me strategize in terms of what are, legal concerns or what legal things should we be thinking about? Do we have the authority to do this? And can we think of anything that could be a problem as we move forward on this so that we can anticipate any potential legal challenges that might, come into place? And so, you may be doing it, like I said, on a project by project basis, or you may be doing a plan over a certain period of time. But planning and doing a needs assessment and consulting with your trusted advisors is very, very important as you're navigating, the planning of your long-term capital improvement project. Let's talk a little bit about budgeting and financing for these projects. So again, it's kind of like we talked a little bit about the special assessment. This kind of goes hand in hand with it. We're going to want to identify the total project cost. You're going to want to have 3 bids. You're going to want to use licensed and bonded contractors. We talked a little bit about the contingency. Having that contingency in there is really smart in case there's a problem. I don't think I've ever seen a long-term capital improvement project that didn't have some surprises, meaning like you're re-roofing, and as you're starting the re-roofing project, you start to notice that the fascia that's adjacent to the roofing is rotted, and you have to, replace that as part of the roofing project. That's going to add a cost to it. So having that contingency in, the whole plan, and then doing a special assessment or whatever funding you're using to pay for it, having that contingency built in there is really smart, because trust me, you don't want to go back and ask for more money after the fact. People don't like that. There's different funding options. We've talked a little bit about this already in this presentation. You can pay for it out of our existing money, get a loan, a special assessment. You can plan it over time and just increase the assessment rate, the monthly assessment rate or the quarterly assessment rate, and then be putting money aside each time pursuant to your reserve study, so that you're saving over a period of time. And then at the end of the useful life pursuant to the reserve study, you have the money in your account to pay for it. Engaging your professional team to help you. So your trusted advisors. This is really important. The team members that you may need to consider having are going to be, we talked about the attorney, right? That's numero uno. Having an engineer or an architect helping you depending on the scope and size of the project. Maybe you need to bring in a project manager, because if you're self-managed board, or maybe you have a management company and they don't have expertise, and you're doing a roofing project that's going to cost $1 million, you want to have somebody who you're hiring to manage the contractor and make sure that they're doing the project correctly. So maybe consider having a project manager to help you. The project manager works for the association, and they are overseeing the vendor to make sure that the vendor is doing everything properly. You want to have competitive bids, a bidding process. Please stay away from hiring family, friends, close associates. Never a good idea to bid out a project like this to somebody. It could also be considered self-dealing, which would be a breach of fiduciary duty. Our firm always advises against doing that. Bring in somebody who is, independent, who's qualified, and get 3 competitive bids. Be careful of the low bid syndrome. Okay, this is something that we see a lot. So boards will say, we're going to go with the lowest bid, and it's usually like way lower, like 30% lower. In my experience, I found that the low bid is usually not the best bid to take, because either they do a bunch of change orders and that ends up costing you more, or the low bidder, they don't do quality work. They don't have, a good team of individuals who are working for the company, and, they're putting on a new roof and they're not doing all the steps that they need to keep that roof from being, having water penetrate the roof. So be careful, low bid syndrome. Also, if you're entering into a contract, and that's kind of the next thing. So once you're hiring a vendor, have your attorney look at the contract. Make sure it's not written one-sided way in favor of the contractor. You're going to want that contract to have a detailed scope of work, right? Timelines. Maybe even you put in some incentives for them to finish it quicker. They get paid a little more if they finish it by X date. Have a payment schedule that's tied to the progress of moving forward. So you're not just giving them a bunch of money because they could just walk away from the job. Check their insurance and bonding and make sure that they provide you evidence of it. Consider whether we need to be an additional insured under their insurance. Have dispute resolution clauses in there. So how do we handle a dispute? How do we terminate the contract if we're not happy with the work that's being done? We'll also want to check the contractor's references, verify their contractor's license with the Arizona Register of Contractors. You can do that all online. We're going to want to get proof of insurance, like I said, and then we're going to want to check references for projects that are similar to ours. I also typically, on top of this, have your attorney review the contract to make sure that it's not too one-sided. One of the things I do is I check to see, hey, is this contractor being sued by anybody else? Like, are there a bunch of lawsuits against this contractor? Is this contractor in bankruptcy? I read the online reviews, and then I report back to the board. Here's, my comments on the contract, but also here's some other information that I found that might be useful for you as you make your decision. You may want to have a performance bond to make sure that the work gets done for larger projects, and all of that, will be discussed as you're negotiating the contract with the vendor. Last few parts on, large capital improvement projects, having good communication with your owners and being transparent about the process is really important to move the project forward. Actually, it's probably the most important thing at the beginning, because people get anxious when they see change, and they get anxious when they see that, hey, they have to pay more. And so really keeping owners informed from the start is a really good idea. So make sure that you're announcing the project, the purpose, the scope, and how much it's going to cost. And make sure that you're saying, if anyone needs a payment plan, we'll be willing to work with you, and we're going to be reasonable in terms of when the payment schedule is going to be due. And give timelines. This is when the project's going to start. This is when it's going to end. host some virtual town hall meetings so that you can answer questions. And this should all be at the beginning of the process and maybe even throughout the process to keep people's anxiety in check and to let them know that, hey, we're over communicating to you on this. One of the things that I always say to clients is the clients that communicate the most, guess what? The HOAs that communicate the most, they have the fewest problems. So staying in touch with your owners, being transparent, listening to any concerns they have, and coming up with reasonable responses are all really important to make sure that this project is successful. Then another important aspect of the large capital improvement projects is having oversight and project management. So let's face it, as board members, myself included, I don't have a lot of construction experience. Okay, so if you want me as a volunteer board member to be in charge of the re-landscaping of our entire association, I don't have the expertise to do that. And so, think about hiring an independent project manager if it's a large project to oversee the project. And that person needs to have experience. Maybe it's an engineer. And we have a list of different resources for you on that can help your association if you're navigating a re-roofing project or an asphalt project. Most of the time for smaller projects, a board person, somebody on the board can kind of be the point guard for it. But on larger projects where, we can't afford to have something go wrong, spending the money to bring in an independent project manager is a really smart idea. And we'll limit your hassles, and we'll just, make the entire project run more smoothly. Let's see. Completion. Now we're at the end of the project. After we've gotten through the entire project, everybody should be thrilled with the results. Maybe consider having a party for your community. I know we did that at our community. We had a community-wide event to celebrate the new amenities. Also, as part of that final step with the contractor, do a walkthrough, make sure that they've done everything they're supposed to do. Ask them to release any liens that may be on the property. There are pre-liens that are done typically at the beginning of a big contracting project. And, invite the contractor to the celebration. Sometimes the contractor pays for it if it's a big enough project. Make sure that you get the warranties in writing. That should be done at the beginning of the project, but make sure that you go over any warranties at that point with the contractor. And any final approvals that we may need with the city, town, or county, all of those should be checked at the end of the project to make sure that we've complied with all aspects of any county, state, or federal laws. Okay, really, that's it for our topic today. We kind of covered a lot in an hour and 4 minutes. Basically, regular assessments, special assessments, and large capital improvement projects, how to best manage those. Okay, wow, we had a great day today. We got through a lot in an hour and a half. So we had over 219 viewers on Zoom and Facebook Live. So amazing turnout today. Thank you so much for being here today and caring about your community. We have a couple more opportunities in 2025 for you to listen in and get free legal advice. Our next First Friday is Friday, November 7th. That's where you can join us on Zoom or Facebook Live and have one question answered for free. That's going to be from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Friday, November 7th. You can find out information about that on our website. We also are going to be teaching a class for Surprise, City of Surprise. It's going to be called the Surprise HOA Summit. It's going to be on Tuesday, November 12th from 6 o'clock to 8 p.m. It's going to be a hybrid format. It's not limited to only Surprise owners and people who live in Surprise. It can be from anywhere. We're going to be talking about new legislation, what are responsibilities of board members, and how an owner can make positive change in their HOA or condo. So check out our website on that to get more information, find out how to register. And last but not least, we have our November class, which is class number 11 of our Neighborhood Services HOA Virtual Academy. That's going to be November 18th at 11 a.m. And we're doing a boot camp for all of our homeowners, board members, managers, and we're going to go over what are the 10 most important things you need to know about associations, and we're going to give you some tips and secrets. As always, all information regarding our classes, whether they're virtual or the person, are going to be on our website. Spending your lunch hour with me, and look forward to seeing you at future classes. Take care.